Stone walls fallen into ruin, a reminder of what once was, a hope of what might one day be again. When life crashes down around us, we can accept the brokenness, or we can take up the tools necessary to rebuild, together. Side by side, hammer and trowel in hand, we can begin again. Learning from the past and shaping the future. Pursuing redemption and renewal. Amidst the rubble of life's messes, we're invited to join a rebuilding project. Following the ways and words of Jesus, restoring the ruins and reclaiming what's been lost. Brick by brick.
So, do you remember having to do a group project in school? Now, I realize for a lot of us it's been a minute, and for some of us it's been more than a minute. And for our students, maybe it was like Thursday, okay? But we've all been in that moment where you find out a portion of your grade is going to be depending on the project that you aren't solely responsible for. And I think no matter what your experience is with group projects, there's really kind of two kinds of people that dominate the groups for a group project, right? They're the folks that love group projects because they know they're probably going to get a better grade than they would have gotten on their own, and will probably have to put in less work than if it was a solo project, right? They're the ones that they're just trying to coast by. If they have the opportunity to contribute to who's in their group, they already picked out at the beginning of the semester the kids they want in their group, right? It's the smart kids, the kids that are going to work hard, and you just want to coast. Now, that brings us to the other group of folks when it comes to a group project. They're the kids that dread them because they know they're going to probably have to work harder than they would have had to work if they were working alone, and probably going to get a worse grade than they would have gotten had they worked alone. Right now, we're not here today to try to adjudicate who belongs in what group or to cast any shame on anyone if you find yourself in one group or the other. We're just trying to acknowledge we've all been there, right? That moment where the group project is hanging before you. And sure, we get it, right? Like the point of a group project isn't just to produce the project. Baked into the idea behind group work is this idea that will put kids in an educational environment where they have to learn to coordinate their efforts with other people. They have to learn to cooperate. They're learning more than just the course material, at least ideally, right? They're learning things like working in a team and cooperation, those kind of things. But if you've done a group project, you know that sometimes those lessons really don't ever make it into some people's practice. Right? There are some folks that they never quite understand the point of the group project is for us to do a project as a group. It's like, I'm just going to get a grade for what everybody else is doing. And so you probably either love group projects or despise them. Because no matter what the intent is to teach cooperation and coordination and all of those kinds of things, all it takes is for somebody to have their own agenda, right? Whatever that is. Whether it's the person who comes in and they're just going to dominate the project, they say, this is how it's going to be, this is what we're doing, you're going to do this, they're going to come in and dominate the project because they have their own agenda. Or it's the person who comes in with their agenda to say, you know what, y'all just do the work, I'm going to be over here. Or worse, they just assume you're going to do the work, and then you find out at the last minute, oh, they didn't do their part, and now we've got to scramble to make up to it. And so all it takes is somebody being a part of the group project that doesn't want to contribute to the group project. And you don't get things like cooperation and coordination. Instead, you're left in a situation that produces bitterness and competition, resentment. And now if all of a sudden you're not sure if we're talking about biology homework or the work of the church, there's a reason for that. Because baked into who we are as human beings is this need to work together. Right? Think back to the Genesis account. What does the creation story tell us? God creates man, places him in the garden, and what does he say? It is not good that he is alone. Now, in the context of the creation story, that leads us to the creation of woman and this partnership of male-female dynamics that reflect something of the image of God. But it's this idea that embedded in creation is the notion that we are made for and require relationship with one another. Right? It's a reflection of who God is. When we say we're made in God's image, part of that means that we're going to reflect something of his nature. And God, who exists eternally in three persons, Father, Son, and Spirit, lives in community within himself. And so he has imprinted deep within us this need for more than just ourselves. We are made for relationships, and yet if you've read the scriptures, if you've lived in the world, if you've done anything, you know that our human relationships are also operating under the influence of sin and human brokenness. Right? So we're made for relationships, but relationships themselves have been fractured by the fall of humanity into sin. And so our relationships don't always work the way that they're supposed to. They don't always lead us towards cooperation and coordination. Sometimes they lead us towards resentment and bitterness and competition with one another. And that influence of sin and human brokenness turns cooperation into competition, and our shared responsibility can easily give way to manipulation when we begin to operate out of our own agenda in the group project together. But as the people of God, as the church, we're called to something more. We're called to something better than that. As the people of God, we're called to overcome this tendency within us towards sin and brokenness. Can we at least agree to that much, right? The world is broken. I think we all check that box and go, yep, I get that. Okay, so the next thing is we all have to agree that the church, as the people of God, are called to something beyond that. We're called as the people of God to live out of the indwelling and transforming presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives, so that those tendency towards sin and selfishness can take a back seat to the work of holiness that God wants to do in us. It means that the church can and should work together for God's best intent. It means that despite our track record to the contrary across centuries of the church being the church is the group most equipped to selflessly cooperate for the greater good and something beyond ourselves. It may not surprise you in the midst of the conversation we're in from the story of Nehemiah that I think there's some instructive things that this story can teach us about this call of the people of God to collectively do more than we do on our own. I think there's something in Nehemiah's story that will help us wrap our minds around what it means to be shaped by a sense of selflessness that puts the greater intent of the whole before our own agendas, biases, and the like. If you need a reminder or to get caught up on Nehemiah's story, it begins during the time of the exile. The exiles have returned home several decades before this, and Nehemiah receives a group of his countrymen as he's serving as cupbearer to the king of Persia. And he asks about the condition of Jerusalem. He asks about the state of the exiles who have returned home. And what he hears breaks his heart. The remnant that has returned is in great distress, and the walls of Jerusalem have been broken down. Its gates have been burned with fire. And so Nehemiah goes to a time of lamenting and prayer and repentance on behalf of God's people. That is until the king sends him back to Jerusalem with all of the resources he will need to spearhead the rebuilding of the walls. And if you were with us last week or you jumped in on the live stream, you'll remember that when Nehemiah got there, he didn't immediately start throwing down bricks. Instead, he took some time, he surveyed the situation, he sought the direction of the Lord, he let things break his heart, and then, and only then, that he approached the people with the notion of rebuilding. And that's where we left the story. The people, Nehemiah comes to the people and says, here's what we need to do. We need to rebuild these walls. And Nehemiah chapter 2 ends with them saying, yes. And so the good work was begun. So we want to pick it up there in Nehemiah chapter 3 this morning. If you're following along in the YouVersion app, all the texts, all the scriptures, and anything on the screen will be there for you. Just find that under the events tab there. We're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 3. Open a Bible, click on a device. We're going to begin in verse 1, and we're going to read the whole chapter. It's a big, long chunk, okay? So bear with me. Follow along. Nehemiah chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Hananel. And the men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zachar, son of Imri, built next to him. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassanah, and they laid the beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired the next section, and next to him Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Meshuzabel, made repairs, and next to him Zadok, the son of Baanah, also made repairs. And the next section was repaired by men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. The Jeshanah gate was repaired by Joiada, son of Pashiah, and Meshullam, son of Besodiah. And they laid its beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Next to them, repairs were made by the men from Gibeon and Mizpah, Melatiah of Gibeon, and Jadon of Meronoth, places under the authority of the governor of Trans-Euphrates. Verse 8, Uziel, son of Harahiah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the next section, and Hananiah, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. They restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Rephaiah, son of Hur, ruler of the half-district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section. Adjoining this, Jedediah, son of Jehoramah, made repairs next to his house, and Hattush, son of Hashbaniah, made repairs next to him. Milkijah, son of Hiram, and Hashub, son of Pahath-Moab, repaired another section of the Tower of the Ovens. Shallum, son of Halohesh, ruler of the half-district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. The valley gate was repaired by Hunan and the residents of Zanoah. And they rebuilt it and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. They also repaired 500 yards of the wall as far as the dung gate. The dung gate was repaired by Milkijah, son of Rechab, ruler of the district of Beth Hakaram. He built it and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. The fountain gate was repaired by Shula, son of Kohazah, ruler of the district of Mizpah. He rebuilt it, roofing it over and putting its doors and bolts and bars in place. He also repaired the wall of the pool of Siloam by the king's garden as far as the steps going down from the city of David. Beyond him, Nehemiah, son of Azbuk, ruler of the half-district of Beth-zor, made repairs to a point opposite the tombs of David, as far as the artificial pool in the house of the heroes. Next to him, the repairs were made by the Levites under Rehum, son of Bani. Beside him, Hashabiah, ruler of the half-district of Kaliah, carried out repairs for his district. Next to him, the repairs were made by their countrymen under Benui, son of Henadad, and ruler of the other half-district of Kaliah. Next to him, Ezra, son of Jeshua, ruler of Mizpah, repaired another section from the point facing the ascent to the armory as far as the angle. Next to him, Baruch, son of Zabai, zealously repaired another section from the angle of the entrance to the house of Eliashab, the high priest. Next to him, Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired another section from the entrance of Eliashab's house to the end of it. Verse 22, the repairs next to him were made by the priests from the surrounding region. Beyond them, Benjamin and Hashub made repairs in front of their house. And next to them, Azariah, son of Mashiach, the son of Ananiah, made repairs beside his house. Next to him, Benui, son of Henadad, repaired another section from Azariah's house to the angle in the corner. And Pilal, son of Uzai, worked opposite the angle in the tower projecting from the upper palace near the court of the guard. Next to him, Pedadiah, son of Parosh, and the temple servants living in the hill of Ophel made repairs up to the point opposite the water gate, toward the east in the projecting tower. Next to them, the men of Tekoa repaired another section from the great projecting tower to the wall of Ophel. Above the house gate, the priests made repairs, each in front of his own house. Next to him, Zadok, son of Immer, made repairs opposite his house. Next to him, Shemaiah, son of Shechaniah, the guard of the east gate, made repairs. Next to him, Hananiah, son of Shelemiah, and Hunan, the sixth son of Zalaph, repaired another section. Next to them, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, made repairs opposite the living quarters. And next to him, Milchijah, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs as far as the house of the temple servants and the merchants opposite the inspection gate, and as far as the room above the corner. And between the room above the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmith and merchants made repairs. Now, this is one of those places in Scripture that it's kind of like, cool story, bro. Thanks. Because it doesn't seem all that spiritual. Right? There's nothing in that you go, oh, like, what does this teach me about God and His ways? In fact, the TLDR read, the too long didn't read version, that's what the cool kids say, right? Is some people began to rebuild the wall. And it was completed. And so there's this part of us that we read through Nehemiah chapter 3 and we're like, appreciate the details. But really, you could have just told us some people built the wall and it was done and moved on, right? The story moved, like there's narrative action happening here, but it doesn't feel like the kind of place that we can derive some deep spiritual meaning from. But I think how the story is told is instructive for us. Because there's a choice made. Right? As Nehemiah is recording his memoirs, as those who later edit the book of Nehemiah together are collecting those memoirs, they could have gone with the short version. Some people set about repairing the walls, and it was completed. But the choice was made to give us all of that detail. To take us into this place where a bunch of people whose names we don't recognize repaired a wall in a city that we aren't familiar with. And it's easy for us to come away and go, okay, so what? But I'm convinced, guys, that the way in which this story is told is instructive for us as we try to make sense of our own current reality in light of Nehemiah's experience. It brings us to the next brick that we need to put in place. A brick we're just going to call community. Last week we introduced this first brick, a brick of hope. It says, if we're not convinced that God is not done and the best is yet to come, then what are we even doing? That as the people of God, our sense of being is rooted in this hope that God is at work. As we turn the page to Nehemiah chapter 3, we begin to understand something of God's heartbeat for community, for this need that we have for relationship, for cooperation and coordination, collaboration. See, Nehemiah shows up on the scene and he knows he needs to rebuild the wall. But what he really understands is that he needs to reconnect the people to some larger purpose, to something beyond themselves. Let's make sure we're remembering the timeline that we've been talking about, that we've bumped into this a couple of times over the last couple of weeks. The wall in question was first destroyed 150 years ago by the Babylonians. From Nehemiah's day, 150 years in the past, the wall was torn down. Even if we allow for the exile and the time that the people aren't in the land, Cyrus sent the first exiles back 92 years before Nehemiah builds the wall. What that means for us is the present reality of walls that were broken down and gates that were burned with fire is the only reality anyone knew. All of the people that Nehemiah approaches to help with this project, the only reality they know is of Jerusalem in ruins. And so, sure, the idea of rebuilding the city sounds great, but the task is too big. Right? It's been 150 years. Surely, if we were going to rebuild the city walls, the walls would be rebuilt. But it's too big. No doubt some people had ideas about how to improve the city, how to create repairs in their part of town. But this idea that the whole wall could be repaired seems impossible. Now let's think about the way city walls work, right? City walls are not just decorative. In the ancient world, city walls are about security, they're about protection, they're about a sense of belonging to this is our city, everything outside the walls is not. Okay? So it doesn't matter what somebody does, and they're like, you know what, somebody should do something about these walls. I'm just going to rebuild a section of one wall right here. Because unless the whole wall gets rebuilt, it doesn't really matter that you built your section up in front of your house. You're like, hey, see, we're working on the walls. Because without the whole wall being in place, it's really not functional. It's there, it might look nice, it might seem fancy, might get some people to pass by and go, oh, hey, that guy rebuilt his wall. But in terms of what the wall is for, it's not accomplishing a thing. Nehemiah recognized how big the task was. He recognized how impossible it seems. But Nehemiah chapter 3 tells us the wall got built. In fact, if we get a little bit further into the story, I think it's in chapter 6, we're going to find out the wall was built in 52 days, so quickly, in fact, that it caught his skeptics and opponents off guard. They're going, whoa, they're done? The whole wall? No way. And so the enormity of the task was an unchangeable reality. The wall wasn't going to get any smaller. The city wasn't going to shrink. Nehemiah understood how big and how impossible the task was. But the story in Nehemiah 3 tells us the wall got built. In fact, archaeological remains of the city will confirm for us what the text of Scripture says. 1.7 miles of post-exilic wall exists in the old city of Jerusalem. at an average of 8 feet thick, with 10 gates and at least 8 watchtowers. As we step into this pursuit of renewal, the season of church revitalization, the thing that often gets talked about is how overwhelming the task is. When you set out to collectively pursue renewal as a church, everyone that talks about that talks about how enormous the task is, how overwhelming the task can be. Most of the time in situations like ours, the decline that is happened all around us has been in place for some time. It's a case where often the present reality is really the only reality that we know. And so we need to take a moment this morning to understand a bit of the reality and the enormity of the task. But again, as we do that, we do it in the context of having already laid a brick called hope, convinced as the people of God that God is not done yet and the best is yet to come. It's present reality for us. It says that as a local church, with the exception of a stretch of about 5 to 6 years, we have experienced a period of sometimes steady and sometimes sharp decline for 35 years. That is a sobering number to hear. It means that the present reality is the only reality many of us may know. And it's a present reality that makes it easy for us to assume that the best days of this local church are back there somewhere in some bygone era. And I don't bring that up to discourage us or frustrate us or create a sense of urgency that I think we already have a sense of that urgency. Putting a number on it may crystallize some of that in our minds, but we understand the task that is before us, the size and the scope of the project. I think we have some sense of that. But if Nehemiah's story tells us anything, it's that we need some honest assessment of the present reality. Here's the honest assessment, guys. It's there in your teaching notes. If you want to jot it down, fill in some blanks. I'd put it like this for us. The task before all of us is bigger than any of us. The task before all of us is bigger than any of us. Now, let me tell you what that means for us. It means there is no one in this room, and there is no one outside of this room who can accomplish on their own what we're setting out to accomplish. You can't tackle this and solve this by simply following Jesus closer. I can't tackle this or solve this by simply following Jesus closer. You can grow in your faith. You could become more like Christ. I can do the same. But any of us just simply doing that will not accomplish what we're setting out to accomplish. The task before all of us is bigger than any of us. It means we need each other. And it means that we need to commit ourselves to a work that goes beyond ourselves, to some bigger purpose. Nehemiah began building the wall, and no doubt, perhaps, as we'll see, even for some of the folks laying bricks, it seemed like an impossible dream. I mean, they were there. They were putting the work in. We've never seen this city with a wall. I remember my grandparents telling me about what it was like when Jerusalem had a wall. I remember what they would tell me about when they would go out and they would come back through the gates and they would see the hustle and the bustle of the merchants. I remember them talking about how safe and secure they felt inside the city at night. And how when they had grown up, they grew out in the countryside and just felt so exposed and alone. But I've heard the stories. I've just never seen Jerusalem with a wall before. And no doubt at times the task seemed too big. And yet Nehemiah chapter 3 tells us the wall got built. You see, guys, the task before them was too big for them too. That's why we can have hope. Because this might be our first effort at pursuing renewal together. This isn't God's first rodeo, y'all. He has a track record and a habit of restoring what is broken. So Nehemiah sets about the task. And if we dig a bit into the way the story is told to us in Nehemiah 3, what we soon find is that there seems to be some recurring themes in this list of wall builders. You may have caught some of them, you may not have. It seems that all these different people, from various walks of life, from various professional guilds, all contribute to the rebuilding of the wall. Where they live, where their place of business exists, where their life is centered. And Nehemiah doesn't recruit a bunch of people and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to build this whole wall, and we're all going to come here, we're going to build this part, and then we're going to build this part, and then we're going to build this part, and then we're going to build this. What Nehemiah sets about is he instructs people to build the part of the wall that's most adjacent to where they live, where they work, where their life is centered. Means they've got a little bit of buy-in, because now they're not building somebody else's wall, they're building their wall. But guess what? When they're building their wall, they're building somebody else's wall, because the whole wall has to be there for it to matter. And so people begin to set about building their section of the wall. Now, here's where the cooperation comes in. Because, like, if I'm building part of a wall here, and, like, Walt, you're over there, you're building, you're just tooling away, man. You're, like, throwing down bricks. And then Ruth, like, you got a corner back there, you're just going at it. You're just putting the bricks down. And Bud and Paula, you guys, you're throwing some bricks down, and you're just going at it. Now, if we don't coordinate, in the end, we're not going to have a wall. We're going to have a bunch of sections of walls, right? So Nehemiah understands there has to be something bigger than you building your wall to get the wall built. You got to understand how the parts fit together, how the pieces come together. You don't want to just build a bunch of individual sections of wall. Can I tell you, that is a way that church revitalization often gets approached. We're just going to start building sections of wall. We're going to get our building right. We're going to do stuff for kids. We're going to make upgrades to our facility and our technology. And we just start building sections of wall. But until we understand they got to all connect together with the same goal, the same purpose, we're just building individual sections of wall. Perhaps one of the most subtle details in the way Nehemiah 3 unfolds is where it begins and where it ends. Did you catch it? Probably not, because by the time we got to the end, you kind of only half listen, right? It gets a whole bunch of names, a whole bunch of places, and you're just I don't know what any of that means. Nehemiah chapter 3 begins and ends fully on purpose with the sheep gate. We're not done till we've circled back around and connected what everybody's doing to the gate we started with. The individual parts are important. We got to figure out the thing that connects them all, that puts all of them together so that we're building a wall and not just individual sections of a wall. See, here's what we have to understand. You can repair your house alone. But to rebuild a city requires a community committed to a shared vision. A few minutes ago, some of you kind of gave me that quizzical dog head tilt when I said, you can't fix this by following Jesus more closely. You're like, doesn't sound like something a preacher ought to say, especially not in church, right? You can absolutely grow your faith. You can invest in disciplines that will help you follow Jesus closer, and it will have an impact on you, on your family, the people immediately around you. You can repair your house alone. But to rebuild a city is going to require a community committed to a sense of a shared vision. Right? It's not enough to just build a wall. We have to build a wall together. We have to figure out how to move from things that drive competition and move towards cooperation. The encouraging thing in Nehemiah's list is if you pay attention to all the people that he describes, they come from all sorts of different walks of life. They're coming from all sorts of different economic classes. They're coming from different professions. No doubt they had their own agendas, their own biases, their own perspectives, their own allegiances. But when they started throwing down bricks, they were all building the same wall. And Nehemiah, in the way this story unfolds in chapter 3, there's this part of this of the history gets told to us. All of these different people from all of these different backgrounds work together. You've got professional goldsmiths, and you've got priests, and you've got merchants and administrators. You have all these people, and they're building the wall. There's plenty of room for differences among them, but what Nehemiah does is he invites them to set aside all the things that could divide them in order to accomplish the one thing that could unite them, getting the wall built. And it wasn't just because we needed to get a wall. Nehemiah wanted to connect the people's heart back to something bigger, to reconnect them to their identity as the people of God, to reconnect them in a way that they would rebuild the wall and restore what it meant for their community to represent God to a watching world. Because as the project to rebuild the walls went, so goes people's opinion of who God is and what He's like. That's why this stuff matters. Because it's ultimately not really about you and me. It's about pointing people to the one whom we've been called to represent. and doing everything we can, everything within our power to represent him as well as we can. So Nehemiah brings all of these diverse people together. And the wall gets built with a sense of unity, yes, but unity through diversity. You can repair your house alone. But to rebuild a city requires a community committed to a shared vision. Now, a shared vision does not mean that we see every present reality the same. It means that when we look to the future of God's intent, we see something like the same picture. And then we commit ourselves to get there together. Invite the band to come back. I'll give you guys a good trick question if you're ever in a fiery game of Bible trivia, right? Somebody will say, who built the walls of Jerusalem? And everybody knows the answer, right? Nehemiah. At least that's what we say. Nehemiah built the walls of Jerusalem. No, he didn't. The people did. It was bigger than him. It was bigger than any agenda that anyone could bring to the project. And if you notice, it was the ultimate group project. You probably missed this because, again, the half listening thing, lots of names, lots of places. But there was a whole section where it's like, yeah, and their officials wouldn't put anything in to shoulder the labor of the work. And then there's a few places scattered throughout the list where people that we ran into early in the list were like, oh yeah, they built another section too. They were working so hard on theirs, they got it done. They're like, oh, hey, you guys need some. So they ran over here and they built another section of the wall, partially because these guys won't shoulder the work. But a shared sense of God calling us to something that's bigger than any of us. It is the thing that turns our future possibility into a present reality. Right? We could spend time and get really frustrated over present reality. So let's start thinking about some future possibilities. And then let's see how God leads and works to make those future possibilities a new present reality for us. Guys, make no mistake, the task before all of us is bigger than any of us. And you can repair your house alone. But if we're going to rebuild a city, it requires that we become committed to a shared vision of God's intent, believing that the best days for this local church are not in the rear view. That they are somewhere out there on the road that stretches out before us. Because God is not done, and the best is yet to come. Pray for us.